I'd like to go make a special little tape here that would give tribute to the folks that I was involved within the drag racing community and within the hot rod community in general. And a couple of things that I mentioned, by the way, just got tossed aside. I'd like to point those up. For instance, this is, most people didn't see Hot Rod Industry News because it was a trade magazine. This is the copy of the magazine. It was something that Peterson did, Peterson Publishing, as a service to the industry, and the fact that they produced the SEMA show, and they were directly involved because the people that were involved in SEMA were advertisers in hot rod and Carcraft and Motor Trend and what have you, including the car companies, which the SEMA show grew into to include all the car companies. I think that was a mistake. It made the show big and successful, but it put them in bed. And now they can see what the trends are in the way of equipment, and they go back to Detroit and make those pieces just like the speed equipment guys did, and stole some of their thunder. But that's a whole nother story. Many years later, after working at Hot Rod Industry News, and when I was in the advertising agency business on Toyota's advertising account, I was approached by Hot Rod Industry News competitor, a Speed and Custom dealer, to do some work for them on the side because it was not a conflict. And I did, and I wrote columns. This is starting lines, and then they switched it to the back of the book and called it finish lines. And I continued to cause hate and discontent with those folks that were supporting the magazine and our drag racing. And it was a lot of fun. This was not a big money-making proposition for me, but it kept me in change, and it kept me out there making noise. As I mentioned in a previous tape about Woomer, Steve Woomer, that was the chairman of the board of SEMA, he called me in, brought me to Seattle, and had me attend a meeting so that I could calm down some of the goings-on. And the result was we were able to get past some of the aggravation that they couldn't seem to solve without me or someone like me. And so that's the portion of the magazine business that I didn't bring up earlier. And now I'd like to show you some pictures of some of my friends and some of my enemies. Some people I love, some people were scoundrels. I won't tell you which is which. I'll just tell you who they are and how they contributed to the whole thing. We mentioned in one segment that Joe Paisano died, and we were all at the funeral, and then we ended up at a restaurant across the street talking about how come the only time we get together is when somebody dies. And Gibbs, I believe, was the one that said, we ought to do this, we ought to have a reunion. And of course everybody went, right. And that was the germ of an idea that produced what we now know as the California Hot Rod Reunion, going on 22 years old. And this is Mr. Paisano in his heyday. Joe owned Vinoya Pistons with Nick Arias and Bobby Toros, and later just him and Toros. And he made a competitive 426 block and lots of pistons, and Joe was a hell of a promoter and a nice guy. He came to my wedding and brought me a very nice present that I still have. And that got the reunion off the ground. And while he's not here to enjoy it, it certainly was one of the it's been one of the highlights of my life, and I suspect, like Mr. Pitts and Mr. Job, this was a good deal, and it was well founded. I mentioned this young man in many instances. He was a big influence in my life. This is Ralph Gouldahl, and I first met him when I came to California. He was the writer at Lions, and then we worked together at Drag Racing Magazine, and then at Peterson for a long time, and then he went to the Golf Magazine, and I went off lobbying, and then we hooked back up when I came back to town, and we're friends to this day. And I'm pleased to say that he's in good shape. He had a health problem that has been fixed, and he's on the way. He came to the gathering recently, and he's an all-around wonderful guy. One of the best drivers known to man, Danny Ongais. My first meeting up with Danny was in a bar with Rembrandt and Pete Ogden over in Paramount, I believe it was. We were in that bar because it had rained out at Lions, and it had been a 2-day meet. This was a Sunday morning, and Ongais was there, and I got introduced to him.
What year?
This would be early '64. I had arrived in California in October of '63. This was January, and the Winter Nationals was coming up. And I got on my motorcycle, which you'll see here, and I rode out to Pomona. And I'm walking along the back fence, trying to figure out a way to get in. And Ongais is there, the cars are in line, and Ongais rolls up his pit pass and passes it through the fence. He says, "Here." I went around and came in and got into the Winter Nationals, no charge. That was really nice of him. He didn't have to do that, and he only had met me a month earlier. And now I'm going to show you a picture of a guy that very few people have seen, but was one hell of a drag racer. His name is Don Yates, and there he is. He was the first guy to go 144 miles an hour in a car called the Cloudburst, which was a car that Sonny Balcain and his brother had built originally, and Don and his brother bought it. And they put Clark Cagle's Arden in it on a whole bunch of nitro. And he was one of the guys that was of the trio of guys that were going really fast at Santa Ana. And that was his car, Art Christman in the 25 car, and Ollie Morris in the Smokin' White Owl, which was a rear engine flathead. And he eventually went 150 in a rear engine car with the flathead. Art switched to a Chrysler and then to a Wedge Ford, and then back to a Chrysler. Made the first run at the first Nationals, and the rest is history. The car's been restored and it's in the museum now. Yates was one of my heroes. He drove for me for about 2 years. He drove the tail end of the Madden involvement, and then he drove, I reunited him with Clark Cagle when we went together with the front mount blown Chrysler, and we had a good time. It was a lot of fun. Yates was a guy who was very self-effacing, and we really hated to lose him. He was a steel worker, and he fell. And being diabetic, when he broke his legs, it didn't do him any good. He eventually died from the wounds, but it took some time to do that. The next guy that Next picture I'm going to show you is a guy everybody knows. This is Gene Adams. Gene's done everything in drag racing. Every time he touches something, it wins. He won in B-Gas. He won in the altered class. He killed them at Lions with gas strikes. He set the world's record several times with the fuel cars when they were just breaking into the sixes with the Adams and Ware car. He had drivers that included Ricky Stewart, who was starter for NHRA for a long time, Billy Scott, Leonard Harris, who was probably the best of them all, and the first guy that drove the dragster that he put his engine in was Mort Smith. Mort Smith was having trouble getting the car down the course, and they put Mickey Brown in it, and Mickey Brown turned it over and killed himself in it. And Mort, to this day, is just devastated because that happened. Leonard Harris, of course, had a terrible accident in the Firestone auto wrecking car, and that took his life as well. Then Gene moved on to Don Enriquez, and a few other guys that I can't even remember who they were all winners. And now he's killing them in the nostalgia racing with Dr. Kim Bates's unblown Chrysler. It looks like a fighter plane. It's painted up with the insignias and stuff like a P-51 or something. Anyway, Gene is definitely a hero. And I used to write the class and the speed number on the window in shoe polish on my Oldsmobile in New Orleans, and drove it around the street like that as a teenager. It was a little bizarre. But Gene is a wonderful guy. I did a whole segment in Drag Racing Magazine called Motorology, and I would go down to Gene's place with a tape recorder, and I'd ask him questions about how to run a Chrysler, and he'd just open up to me, tell me what I needed to know, included cam numbers and compression and how much fuel and all that. He hated fuel because it broke things. He liked to run gasoline because he could run all week on gas. But the nitro just blows things up. I hate it, he says. The next guy is the man himself, Ed Donovan. Sometimes known as the pachyderm, sometimes known as the mole, but one of the great guys in the entire world. He's dressed in his jacket here because he went to the SEMA show for the first and only time when he developed the 417 Chrysler block, and he should have won the best product of the show, but didn't, and lost to some suspension component that the retailers were voting for what they could sell. And retailers didn't bother with Donovan blocks. There wasn't but a couple of hundred of them to begin with. So he didn't win, and it irritated him, and so he never went back. Which is just the same because the racers all knew him and bought the stuff from him anyhow. I really miss him. He was a guy that would come around when we were working on the car, either Madden and I, or at Diego Plymouth later on, or just about anywhere, and he'd say, "Let's go have a bite." And you could not buy dinner when Donovan was there. He bought no matter who was in the room, including heavy hitters. And so we had lots of great meals with him at the Stacks, which is a place that served strawberry pies. And we had some wonderful times there, telling lies, and of course Sherry's, which I mentioned earlier. That was the place we hung out in Inglewood when he was located in Inglewood.